All right, tonight we're going to talk about a couple of different things. I am going to go over 2 or 3 questions from the midterm, but I'm going to do it during the discussion that we have tonight. So I'm going to address a couple of those things. There were 3 questions that I've gotten 50 emails about. So I'm going to talk about those 3 questions specifically. Sorry, I'm still letting people in. So I'm going to talk about those questions specifically and the topics that they cover. And we're going to talk about a couple different things specifically, like I'm going to go over assessing for suicidal ideation. We're going to talk about assessing for depression and anxiety, specifically those. And we're going to talk about there we go. We're going to talk about unhelpful thought patterns that human beings have in general, and we're going to use that as a way to branch out into our discussion groups tonight. And then I'm going to finish the night talking through cognitive behavioral therapy, a little connected with emotionally focused therapy, kind of an integration of those 2 things. I want to end the night talking about that. And then you guys will have questions and things throughout, which is great. We can do that. All right, I'm just trying to get my screen set here. So we will talk about the exam, the questions, like 2 or 3 questions from the exam. We're going to do that by way of our discussion, but I want to start with, because this just happened to me today. I've had this 3 times this week. So I thought, sometimes I have a plan for class and then I see clients during the week and I think this might be a good thing to bring up because these are things that are actually happening for me and a lot of my fellow therapists. So we're going to start talking about assessing suicidal thought, suicidal ideation. There's a strong possibility that you're going to talk about this in other classes as well, which is great. I think that's fine. But since this is a skills kind of training class, I want to talk about it directly and then spend a little bit of time discussing different ways to assess it and things like that. Okay. So let me get over here and share my screen. Okay. If this needs to be larger, I can make it larger for anyone if we need to do that. One thing I'm going to try to do here.
I have a quick question about the slides that you use.
Okay.
Do you post the slides to Moodle or not?
I don't think I have yet, but I can.
Okay, I was just curious because I was like, should I take like screenshots? Because sometimes there's information that I want, but I will also want to be listening. So
yeah, I mean, if I was you, I'd take a screenshot. I mean, you can take a screenshot of it so you have it. I can post them. I can post the slides as well. That's no problem. I kind of jump around a little bit between chapters, so this isn't like a chapter in the book per se.
okay.
This is something that I think I said this the very first class. This class is called Advanced Counseling Skills, but really it's basic. I mean, we haven't had a skills class, right? So, but when when I say we, the instructors that teach this, we've all kind of thought it'd be really good for us to talk. Like, you guys read the book, and that's really helpful because you're going to get kind of flooded with information from the book in terms of like skills and techniques, which is great. And we're going to highlight some of those in the class, but we're also going to talk about really practical things you do with clients in the room with them. And so that's what, like, tonight is a great example of that. I actually literally just did a suicidal risk assessment with a client like an hour ago. I mean, this just happened. So, and I also realized that once you kind of figure out your style, you know, some therapists may do this a little differently. This is information that I typically use, and this is pretty general information. This isn't like my information. This has been around for a while. There has been some changes in vocabulary over time, and I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. But in general, when we talk about suicidal risk, maybe the first time you would have known about any kind of suicidal ideation maybe would have come on the intake paperwork, whatever they fill out for you. Typically, there's going to be a question about that on the paperwork. And as you go through it, you might see that there is suicidal thought or suicidal ideation happening. And so if you see that, you want to address it pretty much immediately, right? And so, like this first bullet here, talking about strategies, one of the things to think through is that you want to address it every time with the client, and you want to address it whether it's thoughts of self-harm or suicide, you want to address it directly. You want to be compassionate, but you want to be straightforward and bold with it. Are you currently having thoughts of hurting yourself? Are you having thoughts of killing yourself? It's okay to say that. I think one of the things that sometimes we might shy away from is being that direct potentially with clients, and I think that's something that we need to kind of work through, obviously, but that is something that we need to be able to do. We have to be direct with our clients about suicidal ideation. In general, like generally speaking, males tend to complete suicide. Their methods tend to be a little more lethal than females. In general, the rates of suicide have been climbing. Even before COVID, the rates were climbing. And so the odds of seeing people that have, like this says, either active or passive suicidal ideation is pretty high. It's going to be pretty high that you're going to find people that have one of those. Active is where you have current suicidal thought, and maybe they have a specific plan or intent, or maybe they don't really have a plan and intent, but they still have the active thought. The passive is where it's kind of intermittent or fleeting. Maybe it comes in and out. That's actually what a client I worked with this week was having, mostly intermittent thought, and there was no plan. There's no lethality behind it. This person knew it was what was going on too. They were able to kind of tell it was there. Whenever you have an active plan, then you'll kind of shift gears and you start thinking more specifically about how to help. But if there's no specific plan, if I can jump over here to the SLAP anagram real quick, specific plans, lethality of plans, that matters. In other words, there's a difference between saying, well, I'm going to take 5 Advil, or I've got I have a gun beside my bed that I can use. Those are different things, different lethalities, and would cause for a little bit different shifting gears. Access to plans or tools, whatever they would, if they talk about it. I've had clients tell me as we go through lethality, as they talk about their suicidal thought, and as I hear them say it happens quite often, and as I hear them say, I might ask, have you had thoughts about it? Have you had thoughts about how you would do that? Or something like that. And they might bring up, well, I've got a gun in my house. I've thought about using a gun or a knife. I thought about hanging myself. Then you have access to tools. Then you start thinking about how you can get this person help and start building a plan to help them. If they can't really think of really a plan, and they really haven't thought about how they would do it, or if they haven't thought about when or anything, you might not necessarily reach out for help at that point. But pretty much every session, you might go back and revisit their suicidal intent. One of the ways that I do that is use scaling questions. I use scaling questions quite often. It's easy to use scaling questions. One typically is, I have no thought of suicidal thought. I have no suicidal thought. 10 is, I've got a gun. I know I can kill myself tonight. That's our scale. And you can typically ask people, today on that scale of 1 to 10, where are you? If we get up past 5, that's when we go through this acronym. We really start getting a lot more serious about it. But if 1 week they're a 6, let's say, and the next week or 2 weeks later they're like a 2, well, that's interesting to me too. So I might ask them, how did you go from 6 to 2? Like, how did that happen? Like, what was going on? And because typically, if something good was happening and maybe they started even feeling more hopeful, you're going to want to highlight that. Hope is a big, huge light that you can highlight for people. You want to try to help them generate hope of some kind. Hope is like your best friend during any kind of suicide risk assessment. Okay. Not every suicidal ideation requires, immediate hospitalization. Sometimes you can help people walk through it by getting social support around them. At the same time, if there's ever a doubt about, like, I'm not sure if they walk out tonight, what's going to happen, then you want to get people involved with them. This is one of those places where confidentiality doesn't matter when we're talking about saving someone's life, helping someone. And typically, if you've gone through and maybe they've written something about suicidal ideation originally in their paperwork, that's something I will ask about anyway. Like, you'll always, on any good paperwork, you'll also see like who their best contact is anyway. And you would ask, hey, is it okay if I contact this person? Is it okay if we call them in? And so I've done that multiple times, where with teens and adults, where I've gone to their contact and contacted them, called them right there where the person's in session, and had them go ahead and come down and kind of walk them through what was going on with me. I was with them the whole time, and we kind of walked through what was happening, and then we kind of all 3 or 4 or 5 of us sometimes kind of come up with a plan. Some people do the plan as a no harm contract, which, if you go on to Google right now, you can see a million no harm contracts online. They're everywhere. There might be one in the book. I'm not sure. I don't think there is, but some textbooks have these. But I started using it's kind of like a generating hope agreement. You can still have a contract of, like, if this is what's happening, here's who I contact, here's what I'm going to do, kind of plan. You can still do that with people, but I think it's also important to help them to see some type of hope. And how to do that would be, don't you think some people would miss you? I think that people really care about you. There's a lot of people that care. Who do you feel like cares about you? And at first they might say no one. They might say no one, or they might say nobody cares. I don't even care. But typically people can at least think of somebody, and then using that person can then help you kind of add a little bit more light to their life. And that adding light, typically that hope, will at least sometimes help de-escalate folks enough that you can kind of walk them through what they need to do. Even if you've done all of that, and you still feel like, I'm not sure what's going to happen if they leave, absolutely always get other people involved. Don't ever do something by yourself. Don't ever just hope that it's okay. Get people involved. Um, Sometimes clients won't let you help them, unfortunately. You can't like physically restrain someone from leaving. If they want to leave, they'll leave. I've had clients walk out before, not really, but that had suicidal thought, but for other things.
Excuse
If
me, Professor or
Yeah.
Dr. Bedard. So if you're having someone with suicidal thoughts and they've walked out on you, wouldn't you call the police on them or no?
Well, I don't think you would call the police on them. You would call whoever they have as a contact, and it depends on what the situation is. You can,
Okay, but you
you can
would, I mean,
all,
how would you handle that though? I mean, if they're walking out and you know that they have a plan in place and all the, the tools to do it, then how would you handle that?
well, you can always get any authority involved for a wellness check for anything, for any reason. You can always do that. So
Okay.
that wouldn't be a bad idea. I think it's always good to call people, whoever they have on their contact list or whoever they've listed. That would be good to do. It's also important for you to have some kind of plan if something like that happens. Sometimes places that you work at might have protocols. Like the first clinic I worked at, we had protocols that we kind of follow, and I ended up calling someone from MHMR one night at 10 o'clock at night to come and do an assessment, because there are people that will come and do risk assessments as well. That's kind of what their jobs are. If you,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you're in private practice and you don't have that security net, and you have a person who doesn't have any social support, then what is that issue? I mean, the only reason I asked this, it was brought up in my first ethics class. So
Yep. What did y'all talk about?
she did say that they would call the authorities. And then I know when I took a class at another university, they said that they called the campus police, and because they had that problem. And so that's why I was asking if you'd call the police, or I'm not, I don't know if the police would come for something like that either.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you can, I would personally call anyone I could to save someone's life personally. That's what I would do. Like I've called campus when I was at Texas Tech, I called campus security one night. Someone left, and then they ended up picking up some poor college kid thinking it was the right person, but it wasn't the right person. But yeah, there's no, ethically speaking, there's nothing stopping you from doing it. That when you're talking about saving someone's life, there's no ethical dilemma there for you to do it. It depends on probably your clientele that you're working with. I've never had anyone walk out with suicidal thought. The other thing is sometimes you don't know someone has suicidal thought. They might not even talk about it that much, or they might talk about it once and then not say anything. And so I would definitely call someone. Like I said, you can call the police to do I've done wellness checks before too. Even when I didn't have a client in my office, when I was on the phone with him and trying to make an appointment and I could tell something was wrong, I've done wellness checks with authorities too. You can do that as well. Anything that you need to do to help people. The hard part about this is that we're also not responsible for what they do or don't do. That's the hard part. We just actually had about an hour-long discussion about this in my Practicum 2 class last week. We do everything we can do, and we do everything we can to help them, to save them, to keep them safe. But there are still times when everything we do is not enough. That does happen to people. That does happen to therapists where clients do commit suicide. And if that does happen, my suggestion to people is, and I've had one of my one friend that happened with, and we, I mean, you immediately want to consult either whether professional peers or I suggest this person go to counseling because it was a kind of a big deal. But this the I guess the crux of this is that suicidal thoughts should be taken seriously for sure. You always ask about it. You always ask directly about it, and then you also assess for how lethal, how much of a plan and how lethal the plan is. That's really the biggest piece to think about. And then I always think you need to get as many people involved as you can, as they will allow, especially if you're talking about like adolescents, for example. I've when I was working with adolescents a lot more, I would get both parents involved, and one of the things I tried to do too is also I would be in charge of them when they came. They would not be in charge of the session, because sometimes parents don't know what to do, and sometimes they need your help too. So you walking them through what's going on. Not when I say be in charge, I don't mean I'm like like authoritarian in any way. I'm saying I'm just trying to I'm trying to help them. When all else fails, you can also coach people to, whether it's a parent or the person, to go to the emergency room, because the emergency room is specifically equipped to handle folks that are suicidal and keep people safe. Because what they'll do is they'll immediately make sure that they're safe physically, and then they'll get them assessed and potentially maybe give them medication if they need to. There's typically every hospital ER has a someone on staff there that does assessments, risk assessments anyway, and so then they'll kind of take over from there. That's something that I've actually sent clients with their parents to the emergency room, and I typically would tell them, hey, if you guys don't mind, just let me know when you get in, or let me know what happens, or I might follow up with them the next day or something like that. What's not on here, I think it's on, I don't even know if I put it on the next slide. No. What's not on here is documenting everything. Document every single thing that you did, every single thing you said, and do it right then. Do it right after it happens. Don't wait. You want to make sure that you have everything documented correctly. And what else was I going to say about that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, okay, you might have said this and I might have missed it. So if it's like the first time and they say like they're on a scale of like 1, or, on the lower end of it, are you contacting their family just to say, hey, these are some thoughts they're having? Or are you not contacting until it becomes a little more serious and you think that they already have a plan to do it?
I typically, if that's a good question, because they could say 1 and then tell me their plan, and it's like, okay, that's a plan, right? And then you're like, okay, I'm getting people involved. Or they could say, I'm like a 7. That to me is like, well, we're getting someone involved. If someone says 1, I'm not typically thinking, I'll always ask, well, do you have a plan? Typically, if someone says 1 or 2 or 3, there's usually not a plan at all. Usually not even really a thought. It's usually more of the passive kind, like it only comes in and out. It just more bothers me. I just don't like it. And there's also keep in mind that we're talking about there are some folks at more risk of suicidal ideation than other folks. There's some populations that might be more at risk. I feel like I have a slide about this. Oh yeah, right here. Like some of the like borderline personality disorder kind of traits, bipolar disorder traits, substance use and substance abuse disorders, folks that have chronic illnesses or chronic pain even. some psychosocial risk factors, unmarried, no children sometimes. These are just risk factors, not automatics. These are just indicators that potentially there could be some suicidal thought. And so people that have limited support, people that are lonely, people that are unemployed. I mean, if there's a history of suicidal thought or attempt,
So say,
people that-
so say that somebody, for instance, said, "Oh, I'm at this, I'm at a, on the lower end of it," and then, but by the time you meet with them again, maybe it's escalated by then, and you haven't told anybody. And I know that you said it's not on us by any means, but because we haven't let somebody know that's like close to them, would that be like we should have said something and then something happened? Would that be anything back on us?
are you saying, you're talking about liability for,
Yes.
yeah. There's,
Like, say I was your client. This has never crossed my mind by any means, but say I was your client and I said, this is how I'm feeling. I've thought this. And you're like, okay. And then, we'll talk about it next time and see how you're feeling. And then something happens. Like I went ahead and went through with it. And before I met with you again, could my family come back and say they met with their therapist, but no, they didn't say anything to me? Like,
yeah, sure.
like, would that come back on us anyway? Or like you said, the liability piece?
Yeah, they could. Yeah, sure. Anything can happen. Y'all know the world we live in, right? Y'all are aware of
Oh, of
like,
course.
there's
So
not a
it'd just
lot
be
of
better.
self-responsibility at some level. I mean, yes. Anyone could come back on you at any time. Absolutely. Anyone can make a complaint about you at any time about anything. Absolutely. Yes. That's now whether it's a legitimate complaint, that's different. That's also why we have liability insurance that helps. It's also why we're a part of organizations that will help us with legal representation if we need. But absolutely, for sure, someone could come back and try and make a complaint or do something legally. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Anytime, just go ahead and know that anytime you ask that question, I'm going to say yes, because anyone could come and make a complaint about anything at any time, whether it's true or not, or yes, that is possible. Absolutely. I mean, you hope it wouldn't happen for sure. Absolutely. But it can happen. I know that sounds really pessimistic and cynical, but it's just true. That's why we document too, right? That's why we try to document as much as we can. And absolutely, there's probably slippery ground when we're talking about, kids or adolescents for sure. Yeah, there's going to be a little more slippery ground there for sure. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, do you tell if they're underage, do you tell their parents no matter where they are on the scale? Like, let's say they're kind of coming out as a 1 or 2, but if they're underage, do you tell their parents just immediately?
I don't, unless there's a
Okay.
plan. Unless there's a plan, or there's been past attempts maybe, or there's been past past suicidal ideation potentially that I might know about. I might, but if they're saying a 1 or a 2, then that's and y'all, that scale is not a ironclad scale either.
Right.
It's an assessment tool, right? Just like everything else. Like there's no guaranteed there's assessment for suicidal ideation is like imperfect anyway. We're just
Right.
trying to make sure that people are safe. And so I wish I could say, well, if they say 4, then you need to contact everybody. it's some of it's going to have to come from other questions that you're going to ask, and some of it's going to have to come from like, something seems off about this. This seems, and if you want, and I've done this before, if you want, I think I've got this. Yeah, let's just jump to the major depressive disorder kind of discussion for a second. If you want, you can actually there's suicidal assessments that you can give people, suicidal risk assessments, pen and paper you can give people. There is like the Beck Depression Inventory you can give to people that has suicidal risk questions on it that you can give people as well, that they might highlight something. So you can also give assessments to people if you're kind of like, I just don't know. Let me give you this assessment. Obviously, if they're underage, you have to get their parent to agree to that as well, not just your adolescent client. But if they're adults, obviously they can give their consent. They have to give their consent for that. But a lot of these are electronic. So if you ever kind of wanted to know, you can give them an assessment so that they can fill it out, and that will get. And then especially suicidal risk assessments themselves will give you some pretty concrete evidence about whatever's going on. And then it'll also, inside those questions, even on the Beck Depression Inventory questions, you can look at it and see how they scored it. And the higher they score it, those questions you might go, hey, talk to me about this, or talk to me about these things, these areas. It seems like you're feeling this way, and let's talk about that, or that. That can actually lead to some really helpful discussions. Sometimes people feel, especially in the case of depression, that's a lot of inward focused, hard on ourselves, regret, kind of thing. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind. It's a little different than anxiety, but I would suggest if you give a scaling question of any kind about anything, and you're like, you're saying this, but you're also, your nonverbals are saying this, it's okay to give someone an assessment, just to get some more information or ask them more questions. That's okay. And so I hope this is helpful. I'm not trying to evade the questions. I'm just saying that these aren't like foolproof. There's no foolproof way. We're just trying to use our best practices to help folks. And I've absolutely, if anybody in your room says, well, I'm at 2, and you keep talking to them, you're like, you seem like a 7, like as you talk to them, you can absolutely, get other people involved if that's what you feel like you need to do. That's kind of your clinical judgment. That's what makes, this is also probably one of the areas that makes what we do kind of an art form at some level. I mean, we try to be scientific as much as we can in terms of like facts and using research-based methods, but there's a little bit of an art to it as well that we can use. So does that all make sense? I feel like I'm just rambling now. Pretty much.
That makes sense.
Okay.
I was going to add that some of it is determined by the setting you're in. For example, if you're privately counseling a school-age child versus a school counselor in school with a school-age child, I can't give a full suicide assessment without parent permission. So that has to come out.
Well, you can't do it in private practice either. You need.
So that's why I wanted to
Yeah.
ask, because then in the school setting, I have to let the parent know, because the parent has to give me permission to do a suicide assessment. And if the parent says no, I can't actually do a full assessment.
Right. You can do a risk assessment, which is what we're talking about.
So
yeah, if you want to do a pencil paper assessment with someone of any pencil paper assessment, you have to have permission. You have to have a permission in any practice.
Okay.
Yeah, any practice. Unless
That's
unless that person's 18, then they can give their own permission for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question when we're talking about adolescents, because I actually came across this week. Let's say you are counseling an adolescent and they say that they have had suicidal thoughts, and that they have a plan but can't verbalize a plan. And I don't have like the full details, but so then you tell parents and you suggest that the parents take them to the ER and the parents say no. Do you call CPS?
So can y'all hear me now? I had to change my
Yeah.
headphones just went out. So you're asking about abuse, child abuse.
Not necessarily, because neglect falls under CPS. So I think that is more, this happened to one of my students. His dad took him to counseling over break, and the student said he was suicidal. He's 7, so take with it what you will. And then I know everything is serious, but and she said he had a plan. Again, I don't know all the details, and told dad and said that before she would move forward, he needed to take him to Children's in Dallas and do a psych eval. And when he said, I don't believe he's being like, I truly don't believe this is what he is saying it is. I'm not going to take him to the hospital. The counselor told dad, I'm going to call CPS, and then did.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was just curious of what your thoughts on that. I mean, obviously everybody can do things differently, but what are your thoughts on getting like CPS involved?
Man, you guys are pushing on the ethics tonight. This is
yeah. I just found it super interesting. The dad knows I'm in school for counseling, and so I feel like he opens up a little bit more with me. This kid, I've been trying to get dad to get him to go to counseling, and so when that happened, dad obviously was a little upset. But he's seeing another counselor within our school. But I was just curious what your thoughts were on it, because I was kind of stumped.
What are y'all's thoughts on it?
Recommend a psych evaluation for that kid. That's all they recommend as well. Even if CPS will be involved, they also recommend the parents take the child to psych evaluation.
I feel like if they've gotten medical, he's been seeing a counselor who's trying to get help. And I feel that if that was her recommendation, to have him go get a psych eval, and dad neglected to do that, I feel like if the child was to go through with it, I feel like that would come back on the dad, and that would be I feel like he would be at fault because he neglected to take
I'll add to that this was her first time meeting the child.
I can say from my experience, I was going through a divorce, and my 7-year-old son said that he wanted to commit suicide, and they took him down to Children's, and he spent 30 days down at Children's there in Dallas. And I think more of that, learned later that was more his mother's push than it was his. And so I would ask a lot more questions about, well, what else is going on? Because I really question just exactly how does a 7-year-old think about the idea of suicide, how they would do it, access to tools to do it, before I would call CPS. But that, again, that's my thoughts based on my personal experience.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you can, I think Joy put this in the chat. Y'all can read but you can call CPS anonymously and ask pretty much any question. If you have a question, if there's like a question of abuse, neglect, they're typically going to ask you the following questions. They're going to ask you, what else do you know? What's going on? Is this a pattern that you know of? Because they're going to look for patterns of something. And that's what they're going to pursue. Now, whether they pursue it or not is kind of up to them. And just by calling and asking some of those questions, if you're unsure, it doesn't mean you're making a report until they say you're making a report. Like if they say, yeah, we probably need to pursue this, then you would be making a report. So in terms of CPS, there's, there's multiple ways to, not multiple, there's a couple of different ways to kind of go about that. Versus if you've heard about neglect or abuse, or like patterns of that you know of, or there's things that just kind of jump out at you. Obviously you're calling and making a report straight away for sure. In this particular case, I'm sure that there's obviously, multiple things going on, and obviously they need to take it seriously. It was enough for this particular counselor to feel like this warranted contacting CPS, which is my assumption would be that this person probably talked to someone about it and got some input. You can do that too. Talk to talk to people, talk to your peers about it and get their, kind of opinion and see what they think, kind of like what we're doing now. But these aren't maybe it's situational. I mean, there's multiple ways to kind of look at it. I think that unfortunately in the school setting, I don't really think the age matters anymore in terms of like knowing about suicide or knowing about certain topics. The age doesn't matter as much. Maybe 10 years ago, a 7-year-old might not know what suicide is. Maybe, 20 years ago. That's not the case anymore. So this isn't something that's isolated, I wouldn't think either, unfortunately. These are things that are going to be happening more. And so depending on where you guys end up or where, the direction you go, you'll find yourself working with cases like this potentially too. So I think the hard part about this particular instance is, or at least this is what I'm hearing. So you guys tell me if I could be off. I could totally be off. I'm hearing a lot of questions tonight that kind of revolve around like, what's my responsibility? What can I get in trouble for? That's what I'm hearing. Am I on there? And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that's what I'm hearing.
I feel like that's like a lot of our concerns of like, we're, especially when it comes to like suicide. I mean, that is something that we as counselors want to do everything that we can to prevent our clients from committing suicide. But it's like trying to figure out like what is right, and also understanding that at the end of the day, if we've done everything that we can do and they still choose to follow through with that we can't take and carry that responsibility if we can sit there and say that we know that we did everything that we could. And so I think it's that, how do we know that we did everything that we could part? I feel like that, I don't know, that's just what I feel like we're kind of talking about. I don't want to like speak for the class on that.
Mm-hmm. That's why I'm asking. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. So that's why I'm asking.
In the school setting, if we share with them the possible resources and we say that we feel like this might be something they need to do, we have to understand that some people may not have insurance to be able to do this. So there's a whole lot of reasons why they may not want to. I know I have a lot of students whose parents may not be fully documented. So is that neglect? I don't think so. And also, the parent can say yes and then doesn't do it. So then I don't call CPS. do I think, it sounded like this kid was getting therapy from outside the school setting. So then that is no denial of the severity of the issue, and it doesn't sound to me like that's neglect at all. And also, I know I've been in situations where we've told parents that they have to take their kids to get an assessment before they come back to school. And I'm very much questioning the legality of that. And so there's certain things that we tend to do around this that I'm wondering about, because at my school, we've done that to kids. And what ends up happening is we do not, because you really, what you're doing is you're suspending the kid. You're denying the kid access to the campus until you fulfill this obligation. So it really is a suspension. Now, what happens is that we don't document that in our report that we have to give to the state, because schools get into trouble for the number of days that are suspended. So we're kind of actually lying on a state document about the fact that we've denied this kid access to the campus. So there's there's so many things that are around this, but I don't, from what I heard, I did not hear that this child was being neglected. I think what I heard was that the parent did not necessarily fully agree with the intensity of the assessment that the counselor gave to him gave to him. So do I think that's neglectful? No.
And for me, I feel like neglect is neglect. Like if your child needs something, or like if he was sick and you didn't take care of it, I feel like that would be neglectful to not get your child the resources that they need, whether you can afford that or not. And I would hate for something like that to happen and the child go through with it and then be like, well, man, I didn't do what what a professional shared with me or advised me to do. And now my child's not here anymore because I didn't want to follow through. I didn't want to listen to what they had to share with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I don't disagree with you, but I do want to point out that what you did say too was that in our system, not everybody has access. And so we're asking sometimes parents to do something that they don't have the ability to do. And then we're saying that they're neglectful because they don't do what they can't do. We really have to think about that. And as a parent, I've been on the other end of that, where I was told that, and my bill was around $11,000, of which I paid a fair chunk. And the school actually didn't have the ability to tell me that anyway, that he couldn't come back until he was assessed. So I think there's a lot around that, and make sure that we look into it and we understand that.
So let me jump in for a second. Sorry, I'm just writing a couple of notes here. Let me jump in for a second. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole too far about a couple of these things. I think this is a good discussion. I want to keep the main thing for a second. What we're talking about is how to successfully, as much as we can, do a suicidal risk assessment. Now we've morphed into a conversation of like, how do we not get in trouble? Like, how do we not be responsible? What's neglect, and how do we call CPS? And see, I think this is a good discussion. And this is not unlike, actually, this is not unlike a discussion I had with students that are literally about to graduate in a month. So this is not something that's going to wrap itself up tonight or in a year or 2 years, however much longer you have in the program. It's going to be something that you're going to wrestle with, because ethics are the gray areas to begin with. Those are the principles that we kind of wrestle with. I would say one of the things that this is what I'm hearing in terms of like our responsibility as clinicians, like thinking through it that way. I'm glad that you're thinking that way. I think that's really good. I think that's really helpful. I think that is maybe feels like a weight on your shoulders to a certain extent. One thing that I would say that you could think about or think through is what is your responsibility and what's the client's responsibility? And client could be, anyone that you're working with or the parents of people you're working with. Like, what's your responsibility and what's the client's responsibility? If we work harder than the client, then what are we creating? We're creating probably not the most healthy relationship, potentially. Now, having said that, if someone's in trouble, obviously we're going to have to work hard. You know, I realize that sometimes people need help and they can't work as hard, and we need to help them, and we kind of help them work on things. That's absolutely for sure. But I think one of the things you guys are, a couple of things y'all are bringing up, I think are good things to think through. In that, like, where's our responsibility? Like, where's it start and end? Can we get in trouble if something happens? You know, can something blow back on us? And you absolutely, like I said before, can get any kind of report against you for sure. Absolutely, that can happen. At the same time, I think to be honest, I think one of the things that's hard for clinicians is to realize, like, where we end and the client begins. That sometimes gets a little grace at times. And so even if you do your best in any situation, not just in suicidal risk assessments, working with a client for 8 months, 12 months, and you do great, and they make a lot of progress, and then they leave your office and then they're going to do whatever they want to do. And that's not my fault. You know, it's not my responsibility. Now, if we do things that are neglectful, if we do things that are neglectful to our client, that's different, right? For example, if someone says something about being suicidal and you brush it off and like, it's no big deal. Well, that's neglectful on our part. One of the things I'll bring up that I think that Jenna said that I think is important in this case is not necessarily just like what the school did or what the therapist did or what CPS does, or some of this is wrapped around the fact that mental health has still got some stigma around it, because that dad just kind of blew off this kind of suicidal thought. That 7-year-old is just trying to get attention, or whatever that thought is. You know, there's still a little bit of a stigma around mental health and what it is or what it isn't, and some of that just comes from the age of the kid is 7. Now, if the kid would have been 17, maybe the dad looks at it differently. But we don't live in that world anymore. This world's a lot different than it used to be. And so I think that's probably where, to me, that's one of the reasons why some of this is so muddy, is because 10 years ago, as a therapist with a 7-year-old, and something like that would have happened, maybe we would respond different than we do now, because now I feel like we all have a little heightened sense of like urgency now, all of us. Like, we feel a little more urgent for our clients. Does that make sense at all? Like, maybe that's what you're feeling, some of you, not all of you, but maybe some of you, which is fine. That's not bad, right? It's okay. But it's good to know that too, like whatever sense of urgency and maybe that's an anxiousness for you or something, you know. Does that make sense? Maybe, hopefully. And that's okay to feel that way, you know. Okay. Now let's shift gears. What time is it? Oh my gosh, 8:25. All right, let me shift gears for a second. Talk about depression. I'm going to jump to the right column over here real quick and just kind of look at a couple of things, because I'm going to actually talk about unhelpful thinking patterns, whether it's depression or anxiety. I'm going to talk about it specifically here in a second. So I'm going to kind of go through just a few things on this right column on the general counseling kind of strategies. Like, normalizing is a skill that you should all pick up on and start using. Normalizing things really helps people. That can be as simple as, man, you're like the 4th person I've talked to today that's feeling this way, or, this is something that's happening. Educating them and normalizing really helps people not feel alone and not feel like they're the only one. And that really helps, especially with depression, really helps a lot. I normalize with you guys all the time. That's why I brought up that Practicum 2 just had this discussion. This is a normal discussion that lots of students are having. It's the same exact kind of principle. Getting medical checkups is really important. There are certain types of issues like hypothyroidism can mimic depressive symptoms. So you want to make sure there's some medical clearance there too. What people eat, how much sleep they get. I mean, all these things matter. The stress that they're under, all those things matter. You're looking at different levels of depression, mild, moderate, severe. Though that matters. When we get into the severe category, that's the one that's, to me, personally for me, is really difficult for me to work with. Because that's really, it's hard. That's where you have to really start to be creative with motivation, even. I've obviously assessing for suicidal risk factors, like we've been talking about. Considering referring for a medical consultation, like if maybe they need to get something checked out medically, or maybe they need med help, medication help. A lot of times people might have already gone and gotten medication help, but maybe that's something that you would ask, hey, is there, and that's on your intake form. A lot of times, is there any medication that you're taking? Looking at goals, short-term goals are good. Long-term goals are good when depending on the severity of depression, short-term goals really help kind of get us day to day. We can't bite the elephant. We can't eat the elephant all at one setting, but we can take one bite at a time. We can set small things that are actually achievable. Sometimes you can actually have them look back on what they've already achieved as well, and let them see that they've already achieved, even in the midst of feeling the way they felt, they've already achieved these XYZ things. Sometimes that helps folks. It just kind of depends on where they're at. Physical exercise, diet, and sleep are like essential. This is not new news, but there's a lot more research behind this now than there used to be. There's actually more serotonin receptors in your guts than there are in your brain. So what you eat matters a lot, very much. That's not the panacea though. Okay. So the special diet is not the panacea. The thing I saw on TikTok the other day is not the panacea. The thing I saw on Instagram or the thing I'd looked up on Google is not everything. It's a variable, and it for sure helps, right? That matters. Sleep matters a lot. The problem with the depression is sometimes they sleep too much. They sleep a lot. So sleep does matter too. I think the last one is the one that's hardest, I think, because once clients feel better, a lot of times they want to stop coming. But that's really usually when you can get the most work done, is when they feel better, or at least feel like in a place where they can like make some really good changes. Okay.
Can I just really kind of boost what you said about the medical checkup or etiologies? My daughter was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety for 6 years, but she neglected to tell anyone that she was having small seizures, very minute, until my older daughter caught it this past November. And we found out that she had epilepsy, and her Wellbutrin, which was 450 milligrams, which I don't know if you know Wellbutrin, but that's a lot, was really contributing to her seizures and making them more present. And I guess we should be happy about that, because we wouldn't have known about the miniature seizures.
Right.
So she got diagnosed with prefrontal cortex epilepsy, because her arms went up, and she is off Wellbutrin, off her anxiety medicine, and in 3 months is the best I've ever seen her in 8
because
years.
she got the right diagnosis. I've got a case where
so it's really important to look at everything.
I've got a case where a kid, he went through doctors too, where they thought it was they were actually thinking he was bipolar 1, maybe schizophrenia, and it turned out that he got a really bad strep. And there's lots of cases now where strep goes into parts of the brain, and affects those parts of the brain, and it looks like bipolar disorder, and all it is a viral medication you give them and then they're better. And then we're talking about 5 years that the family was like, didn't know what was going on. And all of a sudden they went to the right doctor, and the doctor walked in the room, read the file, looked at the kid, talked to him and said, take this medication, and he was fine. So the medical going through the med part is really important, but that's not full. Obviously, sometimes people miss stuff, but you know, that the medical part is really important. Sometimes people don't know. I think sometimes people just don't think that everything's everything's all connected, and having a holistic view is important. I think that's good. And I think it's also good. I did this when I was in private practice. I networked with a lot of physicians because I would help people mentally, but I knew I was going to need to refer people medically, and they would refer people to me. And when they referred them to me, I knew that they had already gotten a really good, checkup, and I kind of knew that we're on the same page. So that's another thing. When you get into practice, you can actually network with other physicians, psychiatrists, physicians, PAs, whoever in your area, and just kind of know what they do and what they're about, and you talk to them about what you're about. That really helps a lot. I think that can help a lot.
It definitely opened my eyes up, because I felt like, no matter what we did for her depression, it just was not helping.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, okay, when I go into practice, this is something I'll think about. But one of the things that they did say with her epilepsy, and what she has now figured out at 20 something years old, that it is a holistic approach, because with
Right.
epilepsy, she has to eat the right food. She has to get 8 hours of sleep. These are all things that she has to do in order to not have a seizure.
Yeah, and the stress level matters. I mean, all that matters.
That's exactly it too.
Yeah, for sure. Let me jump over into I don't want to run out of time. Let me talk about change for a second, because this was a question that lots of people asked me about. The question about, I don't remember the number of the question. I just remember it was for Chaska's model of change. I got a better slide. Let me get a better slide for you guys on that one. I have got a better slide for this. Here we go. Okay. All right. This was and I realized we haven't talked about this in class. Like, we haven't talked about stages of change. I know it was in the book, chapter 3, I think. So this is, if anybody wants to know where this comes from, it's this great big huge book called The Heart and Soul of Change. That was written this, as you can tell, I've read this a lot. This is kind of faded even. I think there's a paperback now. This is I don't know what version this is. But they talk about Prochaska's model of change in here. There's another really good book that addresses this that I've got. Oh, let me find it. That addresses it super directly. It's this book, which is Prochaska's book called Changing for Good. It's a little thinner, a little easier to read, gets to the point quicker, talks about all the stages. This is a really good book. This is this might be the first version. I'm sure that they've redone this now. I've read this a ton. I think it's super good. It was really helpful to me. It resonated with me a lot. So let's talk about this, because one of the question that was asked is basically when the I feel like it's when the client is ready for therapy. I can't remember the question. Someone on here will remember, because I got a lot of emails about it, but I don't remember the actual question.
The wording was something akin to the client is highly motivated to change.
Yes.
Okay. So, preparation is the right answer. Here's the reason why. Pre-contemplation is the whole denial. I don't have a problem. There's nothing going on. Contemplation is something's up. Something's going on here. Like, for example, I have a client that I just worked with today that in his old way of life used to be pretty violent and pretty angry. And when we first started talking, he said he wanted to not do that anymore, but he hasn't really acted that out at all until recently. He's like, now he's actually starting to say that he might have a problem, not admit that he has a problem. Like maybe there's something going on. But this preparation stage is like, I know something's up. I just don't know how to handle it. Can I get help with it? Action is when I'm actually doing the change. So preparation is when our clients, we know that they're ready. Right. And and I don't know, I can't remember if this book goes through like some of the ways to kind of move. You can move people through these stages too. Pre-contemplation to contemplation is a little harder to move people through, but if they get to contemplation, you can start moving people through those stages. And so preparation is the answer, because it's when people are ready. Not when they're doing it, but they're ready. Because a lot of times when they say they're ready, they might not even know what to do about it. That's why they're coming to us. Like they know they need help and they know they need to do something. They might just not know how. Or sometimes they kind of know how, but they need someone to help them, or they need a little bit of an extra push on them, or maybe some accountability there. Does that make sense?
I have a question about that, because I was just pulling up like of the textbook on like Kindle on my computer, and it said like the text says specifically under stage 4 action that here the client is highly motivated to do the work and to initiate tangible behaviors to change for the better. And the question, because I actually like screenshot that question. The question said, Francesca, is the stage that lets the therapist know the client is highly motivated for change is.
Mm-hmm.
And so from reading the text that way and like seeing how it's worded, I'm still like, that still kind of confuses me on how the preparation stage would have been correct.
Well, first of all, I'm giving everybody this question.
Oh, okay.
Ooh, good.
I was like,
But the answer is preparation.
okay.
I'm just telling you that the answer is preparation.
Okay.
Action is not the same as preparation. Action is not just motivation. Action is I'm actually doing things.
Yeah.
Motivation comes before that. I understand why it's confusing based on what the books. I read that too. I understand why it's confusing. It's not a super great question.
Okay.
Preparation is the answer. Action is a little different, because action is like people are moving through and doing the things, like doing the homework, having the conversations, working on things. Preparation, people aren't necessarily doing that all the time. So, but I totally understand why it's confusing. Everyone's getting that question. I'm giving you that one.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. You're welcome. If I could teach on we could talk about this change. We could talk about for 10 weeks. There's a lot going on here. But the answer is preparation. And the answer is preparation. I'll just leave it at that.
Dr. Bedard.
Yep.
So the way that I read it for preparation is like the client's perspective of being like, like I know I'm going to change, like I'm ready to do it, but I'm kind of still hesitant on doing it type of thinking. And that I don't know, that to me is how I took it, and that's why I wasn't sure on if that was when their motivation was at, because it's kind of, it felt like it was wishy-washy at that stage, like I want to, and it's towards a yes, but it still might slip back into a no. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah, I understand. I don't, again, the difference between preparation and action is probably really thin.
Okay.
There's probably some thin there. I have no doubt in my mind that everyone here could argue their case one way or another, and I would say, no, this is what I think. It's it's not an exact science when it comes to it, but I totally understand why. I totally understand why you guys see it like what you just described. I totally get. It totally makes sense what you're saying in terms of
Okay.
like.
I wasn't sure. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wasn't sure if I needed to like understand that those two different stages in a different way.
Yeah, the preparation part is a lot more a lot more. I'm getting ready to do this. This is becoming something I really feel like I want to do or need to do. And that might mean that they don't even contact someone for a little while either. That's not necessarily action, right? Action is this is what I'm doing. This is what's happening. I'm doing these things. And action could also be action could also be contacting someone for help. Could be pieces of action too. So that, I guess, yeah. I don't like the way the book talks about it. Let me just say that.
Okay.
I'm not a
The
huge
way
fan of
that you
that.
just gave examples helped start making things click. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of how the book talks about it. That's okay. I'm just not a huge fan of it. But that's probably because I don't see it that way. I see it the way I see it, right? So that's probably me, just disagreeing. So does that make sense? Maybe. I hope I haven't made it worse. I don't want to make this worse. Hopefully I haven't made this worse. That's not the point. I don't want to make it worse. I feel like I'm making it worse now. Now I'm talking about not liking the book that I wanted everybody to read. So that's probably not helpful. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do some breakout stuff. Where's my, there you go. Okay. Hang on just 1 second. All right. I'm going to send you guys, I'll send you guys something in a second. I'm going to put this in the chat. I'm going to put two things in the chat for you. So in general, when we start thinking through like models of therapy with a lot of evidence base to them, CBT kind of sticks out. Hopefully that one opens. It looks like it's got an X, but hopefully it'll open. CBT sticks out because it's one of the most it's one of the most heavily researched models of therapy that there's ever been. I mean, CBT has been used for lots of different things. So I'm going to use it here just to illustrate basically some basics about how our brain works. We have thoughts, we have emotions, and we have behaviors. And CBT kind of works with all three of those areas to help them work the best that they can work. And so when it first started, obviously it was a lot more heavy thought based in a lot of ways. But the emotion piece is, I think, just as important. I probably do a little integration of CBT and EFT with attachment theory. I kind of integrate all of those together with each other in lots of ways. And so then I know people that just use CBT that's it. I mean, they just use pure CBT, that's it, and that's fine. There's lots of other models of therapy that you can use that are just as effective. This is just one of them, and I'm just using it to illustrate a point. And so when we start thinking about working with people, we need to start thinking about how they think, what they feel, and what they do. That's really important. And the reason why I'm saying it in kind of simple terms is because, especially as we start out, sometimes it can be helpful for us if we get stuck or if we're not sure what's going on, to kind of revert back to, like I said last time, doing empathy, being genuine, asking good questions. And we can use this model and kind of picture this in my head. We can start asking them how they're feeling, even in the moment. Like, how do you feel right now? That's why I brought up a while ago. It seems like everyone's feeling this urgency about clients. I said that because that's what I was feeling you were feeling. Maybe not all of you were feeling that way. Some of you could be watching TV right now. I have no idea, but I know some of you might be feeling this way. So what you can then do with that is say, when you feel XYZ, is there something you're thinking about? Or is there a thought that you're having? Or, well, yeah, I'm thinking blah, blah, blah. When these things happen, what do you typically do? What happens next? And that's the behavior part. Then all of a sudden you've got a map of basically, here's what I do or say or feel, or, you kind of have a basic map. Then you have a basic way to start understanding maybe some of the things that are going on. You can even take this further. If we introduced a situation to this, we can say, here's the situation, which is a lot of times what people talk about, right? They talk about something that's happened at work or at home or in a relationship or with a friend or whatever. When this happens, how does that feel? What are you thinking about? What did you do? It's the same thing. The situation that comes into play, you want to walk through. You can walk through these areas. If you're more pure like attachment, you're going to probably, or especially if you're more pure EFT, even emotion focused individual therapy, you'll camp out with the emotion pieces maybe a little bit more. You won't neglect the other pieces, but you'll camp out there. If you're a behavior person, you're going to camp out with the behavior kind of stuff and kind of look at that. If you're more looking CBT or DBT, or some of these other, like even solution focus, you're definitely going to be thinking thought and how the mind's thinking and things like that. There's multiple ways you can go. That part, the model that you use is as effective as you think you are, however much you believe in the model is how effective it is. If you believe in the model and you know that it works, it will be effective. And I can believe in a totally different model and know it works and be just as effective. What we know about outcome studies tell us that the model doesn't necessarily matter as long as the therapist using it really believes in it and obviously knows how to use it. That's what matters. Okay. So I'm using this as an example to show you the next thing I did. I think I put this in the chat. I hope it shows up. This is something that I show my clients. Can everybody see that? I hope it's big enough. For some reason, it doesn't show up big enough sometimes, with my clients at least. I'll show my clients this list, and some of my EFT people don't really like this because this is too brainy, too thoughty, not enough emotion. But I say fiddle faddle. There's a lot of emotion inside of this sucker. So these are common, unhelpful or thinking patterns, cognitive distortions that they're just kind of, I like it because there's wording and pictures. Some people like the picture and go, some people look at this and look at the picture and go, that's me right there. And then some people, you can tell, I just wait. I'll put it up and I'll just wait. Like everyone's reading it right now. They're not everyone, but people are looking at it, right? And what I usually tell people is a couple of things. This isn't just you. This is human beings. This is how human beings do these things, right? As we look at this, okay? So we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. We got 10 of these. Here's what I want you guys to do in your breakout groups. I don't know how many people got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh man. I tell you what, I'm going to put you in breakout groups, and then I'm going to jump in your group and tell you, here's what I want you to do when you in your group. You're going to take one of these, okay, and you're going to form questions around it to help clients work through them. In other words, for example, discounting the good, disqualifying the positive. How would you help a client work on that? What would need to happen? What does that mean? How would you do that? And I realize I'm going to give you 6 minutes or 7 minutes to do that. You'll have a lot more time, but I want you to start thinking about it. Okay. So I'll give you, every group will have one, and your job will be talking through, how would I help my client with this? What would that look like? Are there certain questions I would ask? Are there activities that they would do? Is there some unique way I've heard that I could help with these things? One of the things that's really cool for me about you doing virtual therapy is I can show my clients these things, and we can actually have a really good discussion about it. And then we actually do activities around it. And if we have time, I'll show you an activity that I do with my clients around these, and you can do it with pretty much any one of these. Okay. Does that make sense? Any question about that? I'm going to jump in your group after I put you in there and tell you which one I want you to do. All right, here we go. Stop. Let's see. There we go. All right. Let's see if your 15 minutes changes the world. Okay, here's what's going to happen. We're not going to have time to go through everyone's ideas. But what I've done is on Moodle, I've put a forum discussion up. I'd love it if every group could just put a little blurb about what they talked about on the forum so everyone can see it. I think that'd be kind of cool to do. You can do that tonight or tomorrow. Whoever does it first gets an A. That's kind of how that's going to work. Whoever does it last fails.
I'm working on it right now.
Yeah. So that's just, that's just how that works. Sorry. All right. So, let's talk about the group that did jumping to conclusions. Who did jumping to conclusions?
Guys, what did I say? What did I say was going to happen?
You were right.
Because literally our group, I was like, I know Chris. I know he's probably going to call in our group to do a little bit of
Yeah.
So literally you were mind reading, literally.
Yes.
And jumping to conclusions, literally.
Brain
Okay.
exercise.
One of those rare instances where you have to tell the client, like, just because you got it right one time doesn't mean you're going to get it right every time.
That's
You gotta-
right. That's right. That's right. You're still messed up. You're still something wrong with you. Yeah. All right.
I'll see if I can take our messed up presentation and make something. Pretty
Yeah.
out of it.
Let's hear it.
We kind of we started to generalize just a little bit because the things we were describing for this particular cognitive distortion, we felt kind of could be applied to most of the distortions. So we said that we would basically in the session, once we had identified this distortion, i.e. jump into conclusions, we would take a couple examples from the client's story and present that to them. Something effective, I noticed you tend to jump to conclusions a little bit. You do a little bit of what we call mind reading, explain those in the situation, and then discuss with the client a little bit about how well that's actually been working for them and if they really are able to read minds. We kind of bandied around the idea a little bit of kind of in the moment asking them to demonstrate their skills for us. If you can actually read minds, tell me what I'm thinking right now. Tell me, exactly what it is, to demonstrate that the mind reading doesn't really work. And then start giving them tools to, we would call putting that thought on trial. So whenever they can start recognizing that they're jumping to conclusions, to take a step back and ask themselves, why am I jumping to this conclusion? And what can I do to stop jumping to that conclusion? And that is more tools that we would have discussed in therapy.
Okay.
But that's pretty much what we came up with.
Great. Love it. Anybody else have anything to add in the group?
Oh, no.
I like something that Tyler said. We were talking about different, I don't want to say coping mechanisms, but exercises to think about things. And he mentioned something his wife uses, which is putting a thought on trial. And I was like, that is such a great visualization, especially in these kinds of circumstances.
Yeah. Awesome. You could do that. You could do that with any of these.
Yeah, Cindy really tied that in by talking about how when we do one of these distortions, it's always good to ask, what's the evidence for this actually working? How do you know that this is, why are you doing this, and is it really working for you the way you want it to? And
yeah, you can always ask, what's your evidence for and evidence against?
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes some of these distortions aren't distortions; they're actually helpful too. Sometimes to people. Sometimes they help people. For example, if you've ever worked with people that have come from domestic violence situations, they do jump to conclusions, and that is helpful for them to a certain extent. So sometimes you can even ask questions like, has this been helpful to you before? And which sometimes means they use it exclusively because it was helpful once, right? Which is another, but that I'm just bringing that up. That's true for all of these, all of these. Can be, sometimes something might be helpful. Doesn't mean that should be the only thing that you use, but there are times when certain things could be helpful to you, which is sometimes you can ask. With any of these, you can say, hey, is this helpful to you, or how has this been helpful to you? And 9 times out of 10, probably not helpful, but that one time, maybe it was helpful, but then they're basing everything they do off that one time, which is another way to ask the question. Does that make sense? Like another way to ask it. Putting thoughts on trial is great. Evidence for and against is great. Love it. It's perfect.
Awesome.
See, and then you just cured everybody. That's one session done.
It'll be $50 for the presentation. I'll collect your PayPal.
There you go. Don't wait too long. Okay. How about all or nothing thinking? We can do a couple more.
We did, we had the all or nothing.
Yep.
And one of the things that we said was, as your client's sitting there and describing, whatever situation they're in, and they're kind of looking at it from that, like a black and white, and it's, the slide said, if they don't do it this way, they feel like a failure. One way to kind of try to talk them through that would be, point blank, just ask them, do you think there's any other way to look at this? Maybe ask them to try to put themselves in an outsider's shoes and look at the situation from the outside and say, well, what do you think somebody else looking at the situation would think? Kind of try to approach it that way.
Yep. Good. Very good. This is especially true. That idea of like, if I'm not perfect, I failed mental, like kind of thought, that really does. That is all or nothing, right? So it literally is all or nothing. I think that's a good point to ask, like, hey, is this true all the time? Or like, nothing's true all the time, obviously, but I think I think that's good. That particular one is really closely related to overgeneralizing in a lot of ways. They kind of match each other really well. So good, very good. How about, we got time for one more. Anybody really want to go? Anybody who's like gung ho, can't wait to talk? Nobody. Crickets. All right. How about disqualifying the positive?
We had that one, and it was kind of two types of disqualifying positive things that happen to you, and or disqualifying positive things that you do. So we started out by one of the things we said was to kind of normalize it to begin with, just to say, yeah, a lot of people can kind of feel that way, can kind of get kind of down and see the negatives. And then we said, take some of their situations that they tell us about and say, well, what if that happened to a friend? Or, what if a friend had your traits? How would you see it a little differently that way? What would other people say if we asked them about you? If we asked them about your strengths, what they might say or about your life? What could happen in your life, or what could you do to make things better? And then for assignments, we said, is there anything good? Can you name one good thing in your life, or one thing that you feel is good about yourself? And then for assignments, we thought journaling, talking about thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and kind of if you did start feeling down, what triggered that? And then the last thing was just next week, if you could try to bring, no matter how small, 3 good things that have happened to you, or 3 good things that you did. Yeah,
good. Very good. The disqualifying the positive is something that happens especially as people get pessimistic or cynical, or it's interesting because there's a perfectionism about a lot of these different distortions that kind of comes into play. But this disqualifying positive things a lot of times means that they don't, like, their brain is wired in such a way that to only see problems sometimes, not solutions, or not good things, not even good things. But one of the things that's interesting about all of these is, in my experience, if I talk about these with clients, whether I show them the PDF or not, a lot of times what happens is people think, at first you might think, well, really all I need to do is just be really positive all the time and then it's fine. And that's a strategy that you could try. In my experience, I don't think that's a long-term strategy, because not everything's positive. Not everything's always anything, right? So, and some of that's personality driven for sure. Some of that, folks that maybe look at things glass half, half full, maybe have that penchant to do that anyway, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in all of these, you can also help people kind of have, I call it realistic positivity. If something's bad, it's bad, or something's wrong, it's wrong, or something doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel good, or something's off, it's off. It doesn't mean the world's ending, but it just means that I don't like that. There's a couple of things that you can think about as we talk about, like, being positive in a way that's not judgmental of themselves and not like rainbows and horseshoes all the time, because that doesn't necessarily work either. And if we can help our clients to be less judgmental of themselves, that's a win. That's a big win. If we can help our clients start to see that they're doing one of these things, that's a win, right? They start catching it, like, oh yeah, I caught myself doing this again. I'm doing it here. I just said that. I'm doing that again. That's a win. Anything like that's a win. I think what I'm not going to have time today. I'm going to do an exercise with you guys next time that pretty much would fit any one of these distortions, and we'll do it together. And it's something I do with clients. Everything that you guys talked about is great. I think it works. I just think it's helpful for us to start thinking about ways to help clients, and this is just one of those things we can kind of start thinking about. But I would love to see all the groups put something on the forum so we can kind of all read it and look at it. I think that'd be really, really cool and helpful to have, so we can kind of share it amongst the group. All right. Now, the last thing Hang on a second. There's one of the exam questions I didn't talk about. Where is it? I thought I had it right here, but I don't. It's a question about Frank. Frank, I noticed blah, blah, blah. Oh, where is it?
If you have it in your Word document, you could Control F and find it that way.
Yeah, I'm looking on my email.
Yeah, the one that asked if it was like a probing question or a focusing statement.
That's it. That's it. It's a
It
focusing statement.
was
Yeah.
chapter on the test review. It was chapter 5, question number 10.
Okay. Read the question.
It says, Frank, I noticed that you mentioned loss of self. Can you say more about what you were thinking when you said that? This counselor response is an example of, and it was either probing question, standardized assessment, focusing statement, or reassessment.
That's it.
Yes.
What's
that's what I
chapter?
had.
What chapter was it?
If I read my, oh,
5.
Is it 5?
Yeah, it's in chapter 5.
yeah, chapter 5's number 10 on my test review, if I'm reading it right.
So I feel like what I got feedback on from people was that a lot of folks thought maybe the answer was C, focusing statement.
That's what I
Yeah.
put.
That's
Yeah.
what I thought. Me too.
Did anybody put probing question?
Yeah.
I did.
No, I did.
If I did, I would have got it right.
That's right. That's right. You would have.
Were there examples in the book that like indicate that it's both? So that was the confusing part.
It was a statement and then a question or vice versa. So there were like
Yeah.
2 sentences, and so it was a little confusing.
Well, but Frank, I noticed you mentioned this is not really, is only reflecting content.
This is focused. Trying to draw.
It's not really focus, is it? It's just reflecting content, right? The question is what we focus on. The probing, it's a probe. We're trying to probe into something deeper, right? Does that make sense?
Wait, okay, say what the correct answer was.
He's saying A, which
It's
is
a probing question.
and I thought it would be trying the attention, like want the client to be focused.
Can you give an example then, if that is what a probing question would look like after a reflecting statement? Can you then maybe state what would a focusing question then look like after a reflecting statement?
A focusing statement?
Mhm.
Yeah, since I guess if we missed it, we got it. We thought C instead of A. So if C were to be right, how would the question maybe have been different? That be possible?
Well, you would just focus your whole thing on what they said, not ask any questions. The whole gist of that whole interaction is the question that was asked, right? Not the statement at the beginning or the reflecting content at the beginning.
Okay.
That doesn't make sense, does it to you?
No, it does, but I actually think in the book they have like an example like that in the other section. So I think maybe that's why people were thrown off. But what you said makes sense.
Yeah.
So in other words, a statement is just that, a statement. So therefore, maybe the answer was part of the question because it was a question. It had to be the question answer.
Mhm.
So maybe it was a part test taking strategy.
Well, I mean, if you read it,
Okay.
if you read it the way, if you read it, sorry, someone, I'm gonna Gotta mute somebody, sorry. If everyone can mute themselves, that'd be awesome. I'm really loud. I hear myself. Thank you. If you read it, if it just said, Frank, I noticed you mentioned loss of self, that's a little bit more maybe focusing potentially, right? What it says is, Frank, I noticed you mentioned loss of self. Can you say more about that? What were you thinking when you said that? That's like that particular response. What kind of response is that? Like that whole interaction, what kind of response is it? Is kind of what it's asking. What's the question's asking? Let me ask one more way. How many of you wrote answered C? How many people? How many
Wait,
people?
what it was C probing?
Yeah, how many people answered C? Focusing statement.
I did. I
did.
believe.
I did.
Okay, how many?
I did too.
How many answered probing question A? So like 5 people, 6. Okay. So if you answered probing question, what made you answer it that way?
It was, I think the actual question in the test was a question, and A said it was a probing question and C was a focusing statement. And I was like, well, they asked a question, so it's a probing question.
But he was also like, what did you think about that? I mean, for me, it'd be like you're trying to get into their brain
Right.
as to what their thoughts were about that. So that's not a focusing statement. You know, this is, you know, what you're trying to get deep, which is what probing is to me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I looked at the different examples between focusing and probing, and it identified more as a probing question than a focusing question. So that's what made me choose probing.
Yeah. So
that I can agree with, because I'm trying to find it in my book, but I remember seeing at like the top of the page somewhere in that section, and it, for one of the focusing statements, it uses a question to get them back.
Yes, it does. That's what threw me off. Yeah. It used a question,
That was
even
between
though.
the two.
Right.
In the majority of the examples in the textbook about focusing, it, like, even when it talks about like zooming in, like one of the examples, it says like the statement, and then it says, when did you start to feel this way? Like, you know, can you give me an example of what most worries you? So even in the like focus section, that's what I think that's.
There were questions you're saying?
Yeah, there were
Right.
like under the focus section. Yeah, it
Right.
would bring up, because I thought of it as, oh, this person maybe has been rambling on. And so you as the counselor are trying to pull out that like one area and then really like focus in on that specific topic.
Oh, okay.
Right.
If it didn't say, can you tell me what you were thinking when you said that? If it said like, I don't know, something that was asking for them to dig a little more deeper specifically versus it made it sound like, can we come back to this? You're rambling now. Let's go back to here.
Oh.
But also on the probing, it says dive into clients' internal experiences, feeling, thoughts, and doubts. And it says, would you like to tell me what's on your mind in this morning? I mean, that's kind of the same thing. Not really, but I mean, you
What
know,
page
it
is
says
that on?
thoughts. That's on page, sorry, I 78. When it says dive into clients' internal experiences, which is what I thought was what it meant, a probing question, thinking. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking at page 84 and it said clarifying statements serve as an invitation for a response, encouraging the client to elaborate further. So that does do that in this question, in our example in the question. But then if I look at all the examples they have, none of them are questions. So I could see how just looking at that part of the statement, that could confuse somebody. But for me, the only reason I disqualified statement because it was an actual question. That's the only reason I did it that way.
Well, and me, the reason why I just see, I thought the counselor was trying to bring the consumer to the point, like the client to the point. Maybe he was traveling around, but not really talking to the point. So she was maybe trying, or he was trying to make the client to focus, to come to the point. So that's why I thought it was a focused
So
statement.
So what you're saying, Doris, and I think other people have said this.
Yeah.
Some of you are reading this like the client is just kind of going in circles.
Yes.
And they needed to be brought back. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Is that what you use focusing statements for? To bring them back?
Well, it depends what you were talking about and how what you phrased, and then if you feel like maybe the client is not really going to the point, then you want to say something so you can see if you can bring the client back to the point.
Gotcha. Okay. So really what's happening is we've read into the question, potentially that we've read into the question that this client was rambling and they needed to be brought back. But some people didn't read it that way, right?
Right. So.
Okay. 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 That makes sense. All right. The answer is A for sure. It's definitely a probing question. There's definitely a statement made at the beginning for sure. That I see more as reflecting content than like I'm focusing on something. I think it's just more reflecting. That's how I see it. I understand. I totally understand how everyone's seeing it the way you're seeing it. It makes sense. I mean, I don't think anybody's reading it totally off the wall or anything. And so you're going to get this point too. I just wanted to talk about it because I think it's work. I got 20 emails about it, so it's like, well, we're going to talk about this for sure. In the midst of the other 100 emails that I already had when I had COVID, that I had to wade through from everybody. But the last question was a stupid question, worded horribly. I think it was the 65. It was a horrible question. So I've already changed it in the question bank. It's not even worded well. So y'all get that one too. So you're gonna get everybody's gonna get 3 points.
Okay.
Thank you.
Which question was that? The last one? Or the 65?
I think it was 65, the one that had a double negative.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like a
Oh,
quadruple negative, basically. It's horrible. It's a worse worded question. What was I gonna say? I was gonna say something about, I don't remember. So everybody's getting 3 points, and I'm glad we got to talk about it. And I don't mind talking about the questions. I don't mind you guys sending me emails and asking about it and stuff. And I want to say this. One thing I'm trying to evaluate too is this textbook. So because I looked at like 3 different textbooks and I just chose this one. So I might potentially change the textbook. I don't like I don't know. I'm just being real. I don't like this textbook that much. It's okay. It's fine. It's got good information. It gets to the point, but there's better textbooks, I think, than this one. And I think there's actually a better textbook. I'm gonna share one that I almost had you guys use instead. It's little, but it's like one of the most powerful books that I ever read. It's called The Elements of Counseling. It's like little. This
Author?
Meyer, I think. Yeah, Scott Meyer and Susan Davis.
Can you put it up again? Sorry, 1 second. Thank you.
I'm sure that this is the first, this is 6th edition. I bet there's like 10 editions now. I'm sure. I think that it's not this color anymore. I know that. Like I still have note cards in here. Like I think this is a really, I've gone back to this over and over and over in my career even. Sometimes I get it out and look at it. I think this is a really helpful book. And so I think this one would be really good. The other one I was going to point out to everyone that changed, this is probably what led me down the mental health road to begin with. It's called The Lost Art of Listening. I read this book every 2 or 3 years. It's different. This is definitely a different color. There's a different version of this now. This is really good. This probably had one of the biggest impacts on me, for sure. It's really, really good. So those are ones that I would say, like, if I could just, I don't know, if I had my way, I'd give like 2 or 3 books that we'd go through. But then I don't, then we're overloading everybody, and then all of a sudden I'm a horrible professor because I give everybody 5 books. They're really good. These are really good. So when we get to the end of the semester, I'm going to ask you guys to tell me your honest opinion about the book. It's okay, but I'm not super hyped about it. So I think it does fine given the information, and that's fine, but I don't know. It's not great.
Is the last book that you held up the one that I think that Joy put in there by Nichols and Strauss?
Oh, Nichols yeah, that's a good one too.
What was the one that you just held up, the last one?
This one.
Like the lost listening.
The one Joy put up. The one Joy put up is
sorry.
The Lost Art of Listening.
And
what does it say underneath it? Because when I look it up, there's like different versions of it.
Right. How Learning to Listen Can Improve Relationships by Nichols.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Michael Nichols.
Okay, then I think the link that Joy put, I think that is the correct one. It looks like there's just maybe an updated.
Yeah, it doesn't look like this. This is like
okay,
probably 1997. So a little while ago. I was 25. It was a huge book for me. Huge. Now, other people might read it and go, whatever. But it was a huge book for me because it's kind of really affected me. So anyway, I'll keep throwing out books. If you guys really want to blow yourselves away and really spend time reading, read this book. This book is super deep. It's called Mind by Daniel Siegel. This is not a page turner. This is a thinker, but it's really good. And then I got a bunch, so I'll stop there. We can do this all night. Okay.
Before you get off, can I ask a quick question about our assignment, about our mock session?
Yeah.
One, do you want us to put the questions as headers?
For the assignment, you're just sorry. You're talking about for
the mock sessions, you have like 4 questions, like how did you feel?
Yeah. That's great. That's perfect. Yep.
Okay, and then do you have a length preference?
Did I say anything? I don't remember.
I know I felt
You
like
said a
you
page.
said page, but I wasn't sure if I
Yeah, I wanted to
remember
ask that too.
correctly.
Yeah, Paige is fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
And is there a rubric for this or anything specific
Please,
that we're
please
supposed
no.
to be talk about, or how do we approach this? I mean, are we, if we talk about real things, is it confidential? That kind of stuff as the client.
Yeah. So, what did you feel when you watched the session back? How did you feel as the counselor or the therapist in the session? What were your positive aspects of your session that stood out? What would you like to get better at moving forward? That's what you
Okay,
answer.
right. But now as the client, what specifics are we supposed to talk about? Do we make it up? Do we bring up life
Oh, you're talking about in the
situations?
session?
Yes.
So this is what I talked about the first class. It's usually easier if we talk about something real. You don't have to go into your deepest, darkest secret that's ever happened to you, or you don't have to do that, but it's usually helpful if it's something real. If you're a good actor and you can just like think of something on the spot, awesome, do that. That's fine. But this is not a therapy session. This is not like we don't have confidence, we don't have like consent. We're not, this is a mock. This is something that we, like if we were meeting live right now, we would be breaking up into groups and doing this as an assignment. That's what we'd be doing. And you can, I think it's better if we use real things that are going on. That's what I think. It works better that way. Otherwise, if sometimes, unless you're really good at doing like making stuff up, you sometimes forget what you said and then you get messed up there. I mean, it just depends on what you're doing. So my suggestion is always to try to keep it as, real to life as you can. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You're not gonna be watching these, are you?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I don't have time. I can't watch them
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna watch them. I want you to watch them.
Quick question. There's 3 people in our group. Is each one of us being the therapist for 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Full time for everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Now it's 9:52. I'm like, this is like Dr. Armstrong timeline right here. This is how late he goes. This is what he does. Before COVID, that dude went to like 10:30 on the regular. He would do it for sure. And I gave him such a hard time. And now here I am, almost 10 o'clock. So everyone, if you're not home, go home. If you're already home, go to sleep.
Deal.
And we'll see y'all later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.